You've seen this movie before. The guy enters the room like a walking billboard. Expensive clothes, impeccable hair, muscles bulging from his tight shirt. He smiles, speaks loudly, exudes forced confidence, and for a few seconds he even seems like the center of the universe. But seconds later, what happens? The women laugh, flirt, validate him, and suddenly ignore him. He disappears. He becomes just another luxury extra on a stage saturated with men trying to be noticed. And the question no one wants to ask looms like an uncomfortable shadow. If he seemed like the ideal man, why was he discarded as if he were predictable? This is the illusion of the visible male, a trap disguised as success, the fatal mistake of believing that what you see is what seduces. Men have been indoctrinated to seek visibility, be the strongest, the most handsome, the most successful, show off, impress, conquer. But in reality, what this posture reveals is desperation camouflaged as prominence. The man who needs to be seen is almost always the man who fears being ignored. And this fear is the scent that female desire repels. Seduction has never been about what jumps out at you, but rather about what invades the unconscious, what imposes itself without explanation. The modern woman, conditioned by centuries of observing, analyzing, and surviving in ambiguous social environments, has developed a brutal emotional radar. She sees beyond what is displayed. She senses the subtext. She knows when a man talks too much to compensate for his inner silence. She knows when he adorns himself because he doesn't believe he is sufficient naked. The visible screams insecurity. And insecurity, however disguised, always sounds like a need. And everything that is too necessary is automatically devalued. There is a cruel irony in all this. The more a man tries to prove he is worthy, the less he seems to be. This is the tragedy of those who seek approval. They become predictable, a product on sale. Too much noise without mystery, too much supply without demand. And when a woman senses this, she responds with what she feels, not with what she sees. She withdraws. Nietzsche already said, everything that originates from weakness is evil, and the visible man behind the aesthetics is often fragile. His self-esteem doesn't come from within. It depends on external confirmation. He doesn't want to be, he wants to be accepted. And that's exactly what makes him incapable of truly seducing. Because seduction isn't a negotiation, it's an imposition of energy. And every attempt to please too much unmasks the absence of power. Now consider the contrast. Think of figures like Marlon Brando in The Godfather, Tommy Shelby in Peaky Blinders, or even Cleopatra in historical accounts. None of them depended on what they wore. They all dominated with a silent, almost uncomfortable force. They didn't compete for attention, they absorbed it. That's the difference between presence and performance, between essence and disguise, between the man who needs to show himself and the man who is enough. This is where the great contradiction arises and where most stumble. The visible man believes he is showing strength when, in fact, he is revealing his fragility. He wants to be perceived as a lion but sounds like a peacock in despair. And this, in the eyes of women, is more pathetic than magnetic. The lion doesn't roar, he simply is. And everyone around feels the need to react to him. The man who lives to be noticed dies from invisibility. He sinks into a cycle where the more he tries to prove his worth, the more he communicates scarcity. The woman feels that he needs to be desired to feel like a man. And unconsciously, she rejects this emotional dependence. Because the feminine doesn't desire the man who begs for attention, but rather the one who already possesses the inner world she wants to explore. Freud would call this the principle of psychic compensation, where what we emphasize most externally is what we lack most internally. A man who displays status all the time is, in fact, trying to fill the absence of personal power. A man who is overconfident often tries to hide the insecurity that eats away at him behind the scenes. And this dissonance is perceived even without words, even without logic. Because desire is not rational, it is intuitive. And female intuition is merciless. But what about the average man? The guy who has no fame, no fortune, no movie star physique? That's exactly where the key lies. The mistake was believing that these elements were the secret. They are merely amplifiers, never the source. The source is in the invisible, in what you transmit when you're not trying to impress, in what your energy says when your mouth is silent, in what your gaze reveals when you don't want to prove anything. Beauty may attract the eyes, but it's the inner state that captivates the soul. The silent force that doesn't need to move, but dominates the entire field. This is the blind spot of most men. They want to be seen when they should be felt. They want to be recognized when they should be inevitable. And this difference is colossal. The industry sells the opposite because it profits from your insecurity. It wants you to think you need more muscle, more designer labels, more performance. Because as long as you're busy trying to look like something, you'll never be something. You'll be the eternal almost, the eternal competitor in the field of validation. But the game of seduction isn't won by the one who shouts the loudest. It's won by the one who remains silent and yet still dominates the atmosphere. And here comes the cruelest part. The man who conquers everything visible and yet feels empty. He gets there. He gets the glances, he gets the flirts, sometimes even the sex. But he still feels she was never truly present, because he never truly attracted her. He only entertained her. And the entertained woman is the woman who leaves. What she wants, deep down, is to feel. To feel that she's facing something she doesn't control, that she doesn't understand, but that moves her. Something that defies the script, that escapes the surface, that imposes itself without words. And if you still think this has to do with appearing strong, you've missed the point. The strength that attracts isn't the strength that is displayed. It's the strength that sustains itself. That doesn't need. That doesn't ask. That simply is. And it's at this point that the game changes. When a man stops trying to appear and begins to vibrate. When he immerses himself in his own presence to the point of becoming impenetrable to external chaos. When he understands that true power has never been about conquering, but about magnetizing. That is the difference between the visible and the irresistible. So the next time you feel the temptation to prove something, stop, breathe, observe, and understand. What you are about to show may be exactly what is sabotaging you. The path is not to shout louder, it is to silence more deeply. Because in silence, the true man is perceived. And at that point, something changes. Her gaze softens. Her body relaxes, the shield falls. Because for the first time, she is not facing a man who wants to be approved. She is facing a man who already possesses himself, and that she doesn't find anywhere else. But to access this level of presence, this invisible state that reverberates effortlessly, requires more than awareness. It requires understanding the root from which it originates. Because this presence isn't a talent. It's a trainable state, a frequency that can be activated, a power that resides within you, even if it's been stifled by years of noise and trying. And that's what we're going to reveal now. The trace she senses even before hearing you. What she perceives in the air, even if you say nothing. The silent vibration that precedes any word. And why, when you learn to access it, everything changes. It's when he enters that everything changes. He doesn't speak. He doesn't show off. He doesn't need to move quickly or make his presence felt with words. But still, everyone notices. It's as if the air around him has a different density. The conversation slows down, glances shift, and the energy of the environment is reorganized. He's not trying to be the center of attention. He simply is. This can't be taught in academia. It can't be bought with money. It can't be simulated with prepared phrases. It's a kind of power that doesn't need to be announced because it's ancestral, instinctive, visceral. This is presence, and presence isn't charm, nor charisma. Presence is a state, a nonverbal code that resonates with the most primitive parts of the human brain. It's what a woman feels in the seconds before processing what's happening. She hasn't even heard your voice yet, but something inside her has already decided whether you represent security or just another irrelevant noise in the world. In neuroscience, this is called subcortical detection. It's how our limbic system picks up nonverbal signals even before the rational cortex can process them. Women perceive this even more acutely, evolutionarily programmed to identify signs of emotional dominance, inner integrity, and energetic coherence. She's not listening to you, she's reading you. And if what she reads in your silence is coherent, dense, and undisturbed, she feels it. She doesn't understand why, but she feels it. A tingling, a restlessness, a desire that arises not from what was said, but from what was transmitted without language. That's the power of the invisible. And that's why most men, even with everything right, appearance, success, conversation, still fail. Because they are empty. Because their inner energy is disorganized, needy, unstable. And the body betrays it. The shoulders betray it. The breathing betrays it. The way he occupies space screams, "I am not yet whole." Robert Greene, in The Art of Seduction, states that the greatest seducers in history didn't conquer with words, but with their aura. Casanova wasn't just eloquent, he was enigmatic. Marilyn Monroe wasn't just beautiful, she was inaccessible behind a calculated vulnerability. James Dean didn't seduce with force, but with a silent pain that made women want to understand what he didn't say. That's what's confusing. The seducer doesn't offer himself as an answer. He presents himself as an enigma, and the feminine, in its essence, is driven by the search for hidden meanings. She doesn't want everything exposed. She wants to discover. She wants to explore. She wants to decipher. And here lies the contradiction that few perceive. The more you explain yourself, the more you lose. The explanatory man dissolves his presence. He gives too much away, too soon. He kills the mystery. And without mystery, there is no fascination. Nietzsche said, "What is done out of love is always beyond good and evil." And this beyond is only accessed by that which transcends logic, exactly what presence evokes. Presence is emotional mastery. It's the ability to remain undisturbed even when external chaos tries to pull you down. It's when your breath doesn't change, your gaze doesn't wander, your body doesn't tense up. It's the state in which you exist so fully, so grounded, that anyone who enters your field feels the impact, even without knowing why. It's like Carl Jung's warrior archetype. He is not aggressive but always ready. He is not noisy but always present. His strength lies in restraint, not explosion. And this restraint is felt, not observed. It doesn't need to be shown. It imposes itself. And when this archetype is activated in modern man, he becomes immune to social rejection, to the need for validation, to the anxiety for acceptance. And that's exactly why he becomes desirable, because he is the opposite of everything that is needy. Presence is when you can look at her for a few seconds longer than normal, without blinking, without smiling, without fear. And in that gaze, yes, there is silence, but there is also an implicit question. Can you stand me? And if she looks away, it's not because you made a mistake, it's because you imposed a kind of emotional tension that requires courage to sustain. And that's exactly what generates desire. This type of man is not remembered for the words he said, but for the impact he left. He enters a room and something happens. He leaves and something remains. People try to explain. He has something different. He has a vibe, an energy. They can't define it, and that's the essence of presence. It's indefinable. And for that very reason, unforgettable. That's why you can be in an environment with more handsome, richer, more talkative men, and still be the center of attention. Because a woman isn't looking for the loudest. She's looking for the most coherent, the most whole, the one who doesn't need anyone to be who he is. And this man doesn't strive to be desired. He simply emits a vibration that says, "I am here," completely, and let the world align itself. This vibration can be trained, but never faked. Presence cannot be built on insecurity. It only arises when a man silences the inner noise, when he resolves his invisible wars, when he stops reacting to the world and begins to shape it. This is the man a woman senses even before noticing his appearance, because he emits signals that pass under the conscious radar. He doesn't need a catchy phrase, because his presence is already an invitation to desire. It's already a declaration of power. This is the man a woman senses even before noticing his appearance, because he emits signals that pass under the conscious radar. He doesn't need a catchy phrase, because his presence is already an invitation to desire. It's already a declaration of power. And that's precisely why a man who has learned to cultivate this state can even say less, do less, and still achieve more. Because he understood the principle. Seduction isn't about excess, it's about intention. It's not about showing more. It's about allowing yourself to be felt. And this state is so rare that when she finds it, she feels an instinctive fear of losing it. Because men like that don't depend on each other. They don't explain themselves. They don't adjust. They simply walk at their own pace and let the world chase after them. She perceives this, not through analysis, but through feeling. And this feeling generates a kind of connection that transcends the rational. She begins to imagine who he is, what he has lived through, why he is the way he is. And the more she imagines, the more she connects. Because it is imagination that builds emotion. And emotion is the true fertile ground of desire. The problem is that most men want to skip this step. They want to be desired quickly. They want to be understood immediately. But what is understood too much loses its charm, and what is overexposed loses its value. A woman doesn't fall in love with a man who explains himself. She surrenders to the man who makes her lose herself. And she only loses herself in the face of mystery, of that which imposes itself without revealing itself, of that which doesn't ask but magnetizes. And presence is that, a mystery in the form of a man. Presence is the opposite of anxiety. It's the calmness of someone who is not in a hurry. It's the density of someone who doesn't fear silence. It's the security of someone who knows that, wherever he is, he will be felt. Not because he is the tallest nor the most handsome, but because he is the most stable inside. And this is where the true transformation happens, when a man realizes that his real strength is not in what he conquers, but in what he provokes effortlessly. When he understands that he doesn't need to stand out to be noticed, he only needs to be whole, and the world will notice. And when he walks with this awareness, he becomes dangerous, because now he is immune to the game. He is not trying to win. He has already won. He is not trying to prove anything. He already is. And in that state, she can't ignore him. She feels it. In the first glance, in the first gesture, in the first silence. And when she feels it, it's already too late. Now that you understand what hidden presence is, and why it's the invisible trait women desire even before you open your mouth, we need to take the next step. Because understanding isn't enough. You need to cultivate it. Most men believe seduction is something you do, as if it were a set of actions, phrases, postures, and rituals. They search for what to say, how to act, when to touch, what to wear. And with that, they transform desire into a mechanical script where each step is just another attempt to avoid mistakes. But the magnetic man doesn't do it. He is it. He doesn't seek techniques to impress. He cultivates internal states that don't allow himself to be ignored. The difference is brutal. While the first tries to connect with the world, the second becomes a gravitational field where the world is attracted to him. Cultivating the invisible is understanding that what truly attracts is not what you show, but what you transmit unintentionally. And the first step is understanding the nature of your presence. Your mind may be trained, your speech may be articulate, but if your body carries tension, anxiety, or insecurity, this will be perceived before any word comes out. Presence is a direct reflection of your internal state. It's no use memorizing the external game if your energy betrays that you are in debt to yourself. Women feel this. Everyone feels it. Here's the first practical element: strategic silence. Instead of trying to fill every space with words, the man who cultivates presence learns to sustain silence. Because silence generates tension. And tension, when firmly sustained, generates magnetism. Silence shows control. It says, I am not in a hurry. I'm not desperate to be accepted. I am comfortable with myself. And this inner comfort becomes unbearably seductive. Observe the most hypnotic men in history. They spoke less. They chose their words. And above all, they knew when to be silent. Because they understood that true seduction happens in the intervals, in the pause before the answer, in the gaze that lingers longer than it should, in the touch that is purposefully delayed. All this conveys a hidden message. I don't need to rush because I control the rhythm. The second element is a firm and serene gaze. The eye is the window to the unconscious. Men who look away too much, blink excessively, or avoid eye contact are communicating insecurity, even without realizing it. The man who holds eye contact calmly, without aggression, conveys silent authority. He doesn't need to say, I trust myself. His gaze already screams it. But note, this isn't about a predatory gaze. It's about ocular presence. The ability to be there, fully present, without escape. A gaze that scans, that observes, that penetrates without violence. This creates an almost hypnotic atmosphere, where the woman doesn't feel observed, but absorbed. The third pillar of invisible presence is emotional mastery. Nothing is more irresistible than a man who doesn't react. This doesn't mean being apathetic. It means being unwavering. When you are tested, and you will be, your reaction reveals more than 1,000 words. A man who reacts with anger, neediness, or justification shows that his power is fragile. But the man who smiles in the face of provocation, who observes the drama without being pulled by it, who embraces the chaos without losing himself, that man becomes a rock in the midst of the storm. And the feminine, by its very fluid and emotional nature, desires to merge with what is solid. This kind of stability doesn't come from technique. It comes from integration, from the man who has already looked at his shadows, who has already descended into the depths of his psyche, who has already faced his fears without breaking. This is the man who doesn't need to win every debate because he has already won the internal dialogues. And that's why when he speaks, his voice carries weight, even if he says little, even if he says nothing. The fourth point is controlled vulnerability. A common mistake is confusing vulnerability with emotional fragility. Nothing could be further from the truth. Vulnerability is the opposite of a mask. It's the courage not to perform. It's the ability to show humanity without collapsing. The man who talks about his failures without trying to look pitiful, who exposes his falls without dramatizing, who acknowledges his wounds without asking for a cure. This man is not only rare, he is irresistible, because the woman sees in him not a wounded boy, but a man who bled and didn't die. And that's sexy on a level that the physical will never reach. This leads us to the most hidden, but perhaps the most powerful point, the inversion of need. The woman knows and feels when a man needs to be desired, and this makes him less desirable. The game of desire is cruel in this aspect. Whoever desires too much loses value. Whoever is too available generates boredom. But the man who vibrates fully for himself, who fills himself so deeply that he doesn't depend on the external gaze, this man provokes a restlessness that she can't explain. She begins to wonder, why doesn't he want me? And that question is the embryo of desire. Do you want to be desired? Then learn to be whole. Learn to move through the world as if there were no scarcity, as if your attention were rare, as if your energy weren't for sale. Because the faster you give yourself away, the more you depreciate yourself. A woman needs to feel that being by your side isn't a right, it's a privilege, and that privilege needs to be earned. When she realizes you're not an easy prize, when she feels she needs to deserve your depth, she enters the game. And in this game, whoever holds the key to scarcity holds the throne of desire. All these strategies have one thing in common. They don't depend on external circumstances. Your height, your money, your past don't matter. They are accessible to any man who decides to internalize a new standard, who decides to abandon performance to become presence, who understands that true sex appeal doesn't come from the body, but from the psyche. It's possible to train all of this, but it requires practice, awareness, and above all, deconstruction. You'll have to unlearn. You'll have to silence the social clown within you. You'll have to let go of the desperate desire to be loved, and begin to become someone who already loves themselves so much that any external validation becomes a bonus, not a necessity. It won't be easy. You'll be misunderstood. You'll be called cold, arrogant, distant. But observe carefully. These words will come from the people who were used to your old version, the weak, predictable, needy version. And when they can no longer control your energy, they will try to label your freedom. But that's good, because it shows you've gone off script. And it's off script that the real game begins. The man who cultivates the invisible becomes socially immortal, because he leaves a mark. He is not forgotten. He is not easily replaced. He becomes the what if that inhabits the feminine unconscious. The what if I had managed to decipher it? The what if I had gone deeper? And this kind of memory is a sweet poison that corrodes slowly. He's not the man she displays. He's the man she can't explain. And for that very reason, she never forgets. The paradox of seduction is brutal. The less you need, the more you attract. The less you seek, the more you receive. But this only works when it's real. When your lack of need isn't a strategy, but a state. And this state is only accessible when you start living for yourself, not to please others. In short, don't say everything. Don't reveal everything. Don't give everything away. Don't be too available. Don't explain yourself. Don't justify yourself. Instead, be, vibrate, emanate, and let the world feel it. The modern woman is exhausted by predictable men, by programmed conversations, by repeated profiles. She wants intensity, but doesn't know how to ask for it. She wants depth, but doesn't know how to seek it. She wants presence, but lives surrounded by distractions with legs. If you are present, you will be the exception. And if you are the exception, you will be desired. But desire only exists where there is tension. And tension only exists where there is silence. And silence is only bearable for those who have faced the void without getting lost. Cultivating the invisible is becoming that kind of man. The one who doesn't need to dominate with force, because he already dominates frequently. Who doesn't need to shout, because his silence carries more weight than 1,000 voices. Who doesn't need to run, because he knows that where he treads, everything slows down. You've come this far because something within you understood. You understood that the game was never about having more. It was about being more. You understood that while most people rush to be seen, the true seducers are those who know how to be felt. You saw that. You felt that. And now, there's an invisible line before you. On one side, the world of those who consume this type of content get excited for a few hours and then go back to being exactly who they were before. On the other, those who decide to cross the line and become something completely different, something that cannot be ignored. The Forbidden Manual, How to Trigger Desire in 60 Seconds, is not an audiobook. It's the logical continuation of what you started here. It's the invisible training ground for the man who wants to make an impact even before being heard. It doesn't offer ready-made phrases or generic formulas. It reconfigures your frequency. It adjusts your mental posture, your body energy, your breathing, your silence. It transforms you from a man who seeks attention into a man who naturally receives it. Each word was crafted to activate a state within you, a state where doubt doesn't enter, where fear loses its voice, where need disappears. This audiobook is a weapon, one you carry on your body, unseen by anyone, but felt by everyone. And the most brutal part? It works in seconds. While most are still trying to find what to say, you will already be engraved in her memory. Not for beauty, not for status, but for presence. This is the turning point. You can continue consuming tent like everyone else, or you can become the kind of man who no longer needs to consume because he has become the reference. It's all there. The map, the method, the vibration, everything gathered so that you never again have to ask yourself, why didn't she feel anything? She will feel, and she won't understand why. But understand this: presence without practice becomes illusion. Desire without direction becomes frustration. You have in your hands a real opportunity to become something that 99% of men will never become. But this requires a decision. The decision not only to watch, but to practice, to listen and internalize. From executing until the invisible that dwells within you becomes your mark, not your mask. The Forbidden Manual is no longer a promise. It is the practical translation of what you always knew you could be. And if you understood everything that has been said so far, then you know it's no longer about having courage. It's about no longer accepting to live invisibly, because now you already know what she feels. And what she feels depends on who you are when the world is silent. The manual is here, and so are you.